It was Christmas Eve and the Johnson family was gathered at the family cabin nestled in the snow-covered mountains of Colorado. Mark and Lisa, along with their teenage children Emma and Tyler, had been looking forward to this getaway for months, a chance to unplug from their hectic lives back in the city and enjoy some quality time together. As the sun began to set behind the towering pines, the family settled in for a cozy evening by the fireplace. Lisa was preparing a feast of roast turkey, mashed potatoes, and all the fixings in the kitchen, while Mark chopped wood outside for the hungry flames. Emma and Tyler were engrossed in a competitive game of chess, their sibling rivalry finding a productive outlet for once. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light flooded through the frosty windows, casting eerie shadows on the cabin walls. The chess pieces rattled and fell as a thunderous boom shook the very foundations of the wooden structure. What on earth was that? Lisa called out from the kitchen, a note of alarm in her voice. Mark burst in from the cold, his cheeks ruddy and his eyes wide. "There's something in the sky," he exclaimed breathlessly. "It looks like, I can't even describe it. You have to see it to believe it." The family rushed to the front windows, huddling together as they peered up at the eerie spectacle unfolding above. The inky night sky was alive with pulsating lights and swirling vortexes of color never seen in any astronomical phenomenon before. A massive saucer-like craft hovered directly overhead, dwarfing the tallest evergreens. Multicolored beams of light shot out from the unidentifiable object, zigzagging across the clearing and slicing into the untouched snow in steaming stripes. The air itself seemed to hum and vibrate with an alien energy that made their bones tingle and their hair stand on end. What is that thing?" Emma asked, her usually confident tone squeezed into a hoarse whisper. "It can't be real, can it?" Tyler shook his head slowly, refusing to tear his eyes away from the astonishing sight. "I don't know, but it's definitely not from here. Not from Earth, I mean." As if on cue, a deep mechanical rumble emanated from the mysterious craft, rising to a near-deafening pitch. The ground quaked under their feet, sending loose objects clattering to the floor. A sharp hissing sound cut through the chaos as a hatch opened on the underbelly of the saucer, expelling a plume of green vapor. The family watched in stunned disbelief as strange figures began to descend from the ship on platforms of shimmering light. The beings were tall and spindly, with elongated limbs and oversized heads that glinted metallically in the reflected glow of their spacecraft. Mark motioned for everyone to step back from the window and crouch down. "We can't let them see us," he whispered urgently, his mind racing to make sense of the surreal situation. But it was too late. As soon as the words left Mark's mouth, one of the alien figures turned its bulbous head in their direction, fixing the cabin with a piercing red stare that seemed to penetrate straight through the walls. A chilling electronic voice boomed out, echoing across the frozen landscape. "Humans sighted. Commence retrieval protocol. Resistance is futile." The Johnson family huddled closer together as icy tendrils of fear wrapped around their hearts. Their idyllic Christmas in the mountains had turned into a living nightmare, and it was just beginning. Mark quickly ushered his family away from the windows, his mind working overtime to formulate a plan. They couldn't just sit there like sitting ducks, waiting for those otherworldly invaders to break down their door. "Lisa, take the kids down to the basement," he instructed, trying to keep his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "There's an old root cellar down there, behind the shelves of canned goods. It should buy us some time." Lisa nodded, her face pale but determined as she herded Emma and Tyler towards the creaky wooden stairs. Mark dashed to the fireplace, snatching up the iron poker and gripping it tightly, ready to defend his family with every fiber of his being. Heavy footsteps crunched in the snow outside, drawing closer with each passing second. A series of metallic clicks and whirs suggested the aliens were readying some kind of weaponry. Mark braced himself against the front door, his knuckles white around the poker's handle. Suddenly, a searing beam of blue light punched through the door like a fiery lance, missing Mark's head by mere inches. The smell of charred wood filled his nostrils as he leapt aside, the poker clanging to the floor. More beams followed, slicing through the walls as if they were made of paper. "So much for a peaceful first contact," Mark muttered grimly, scooping up the poker and scrambling towards the basement stairs. He could hear the walls splintering and cracking under the relentless barrage, the cabin's structural integrity failing fast. Down in the dank root cellar, Lisa and the kids huddled together in the furthest corner, wedged between dusty shelves of preserves and cobwebbed crates. Mark shouldered the heavy door shut behind him, sliding the bolt into place with a rusty scrape. "What do we do now?" Emma whispered, her eyes wide and frightened in the dimness. "Those things are going to find us down here. We're trapped." Mark's mind raced, desperately grasping for a solution. The cabin shuddered and groaned above them, showering the cellar with dust and splinters. They didn't have much time. Then, his gaze landed on a half-forgotten memory, the old mine shaft that burrowed into the mountainside just beyond the outhouse. They had discovered its hidden entrance the previous summer but sealed it off for safety. It was a long shot, but it might be their only chance. "I have an idea," Mark said, his voice low and urgent. "There's an old mine shaft out back, from the gold rush days. If we can get to it, we might be able to slip away undetected." Lisa frowned, torn between fear and doubt. "Are you sure it's safe? Those old mines are treacherous. And how do we even get past them?" As if to punctuate her question, a resounding boom shook the cellar, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps tramping across the floorboards above. The aliens were inside the cabin. "We don't have a choice," Mark said grimly, snatching up a kerosene lantern from a shelf and lighting it with trembling fingers. "It's either risk the mine or wait to be captured. Or worse." With that, he began to shift aside the heavy crates that concealed the cellar's old drainage tunnel, a narrow, claustrophobic passage that led out towards the back of the property. Lisa and the kids fell in behind him, their breathing shallow and rapid in the close confines. The tunnel was even tighter than Mark remembered, forcing them to inch along on their hands and knees, jagged rocks scraping against their palms. The dank air pressed in around them, thick with the smell of wet earth and something else, a strange metallic tang that made their noses itch and their eyes water. After what felt like an eternity of crawling through the suffocating darkness, they finally emerged into the cold night air, gulping gratefully at the crisp breeze. The mine shaft loomed before them like a gaping maw, its timbered entrance half collapsed and choked with dead vines. Mark hesitated for a moment, suddenly acutely aware of the danger they were about to plunge into. But another earth-shaking boom from the direction of the cabin quickly quelled any doubts. The aliens would find the tunnel soon enough. They had to keep moving. "Stay close to me," he murmured, lifting the lantern high as he stepped into the mine's waiting jaws. "And pray that this leads us somewhere safe." The mine shaft was even more treacherous than Mark had imagined. The narrow passageway was choked with rubble and debris, the remnants of long-abandoned mining equipment rusting in the shadows. The air grew colder and damper as they descended deeper into the mountain's belly, their breath misting in the lantern's flickering glow. Lisa kept a tight grip on Emma and Tyler's hands, fear and determination warring in her eyes. The kids were holding up remarkably well given the circumstances, their initial terror gradually giving way to a numb sort of shock. Mark led the way, picking his path carefully through the jumbled rocks and rotting timbers. The crude map he had found tacked to the cellar wall was proving more useful than he'd dared to hope, guiding them through the labyrinthine tunnels with a rough approximation of accuracy. Suddenly, a distant sound echoed through the shaft behind them, bouncing off the craggy walls in distorted snatches. Mark froze, straining his ears to make out the noise over the thudding of his own heartbeat. It was a mechanical whirring, interspersed with eerie clicking and humming noises that set his teeth on edge. The aliens had found the tunnel entrance. "They're coming," he hissed, grabbing Lisa's hand and tugging her forward. "We have to move faster. They'll be on us in minutes." The family broke into a stumbling run, their ragged breathing loud in the cramped space. The shaft began to angle upward, the incline growing steeper with every step until they were half climbing, half crawling over the uneven ground. Just as Mark's burning leg muscles were about to give out, they rounded a corner and found themselves in a small, domed chamber. A rusted metal ladder ascended up one curving wall, leading to a circular opening high above their heads. Thin shafts of moonlight filtered down through the hole, casting an eerie silver glow over the scene. "This must be an old ventilation shaft," Mark panted, pointing upward. "If we can get through there, it should lead us out to the surface." Lisa eyed the ladder dubiously, noting the missing rungs and flaking rust. "Are you sure it's safe? It looks like it hasn't been used in decades." "Do we have a choice?" Mark countered grimly. The alien noises were growing louder by the second, echoing up the tunnel behind them like the chittering of some monstrous insect. With a resolute nod, Lisa boosted Emma onto the bottom rung, keeping a steadying hand on her back as she began to climb. Tyler followed close behind, his face set in a mask of determination. Mark brought up the rear, the lantern swinging wildly from his belt as he hauled himself up the creaking ladder. The metal groaned and shuddered under their combined weight, flakes of rust sifting down like bloody snowflakes. They were halfway up when a searing blue beam suddenly lanced through the chamber below, incinerating the spot where they'd been standing moments before. Mark risked a glance down and immediately wished he hadn't. The aliens had reached the chamber, their spindly forms silhouetted against the tunnel's gaping mouth. They were even more terrifying up close, their bulbous heads bristling with pulsating sensors and twitching antennae. Each one gripped a strange, tubular device that glowed with an unearthly blue light, the source of the deadly beams. "Keep going," Mark shouted, his voice cracking with fear and urgency. "Don't look back." Another beam sliced through the air beside them, close enough to singe the hair on Mark's arm. Lisa screamed, almost losing her grip on the shaking ladder. The kids were sobbing openly now, their tears gleaming in the shaft of moonlight above. Somehow, through a haze of terror and adrenaline, they managed to reach the top of the ladder. Mark practically threw Emma and Tyler through the opening, shoving Lisa through after them before hauling himself up with a final, desperate heave. They found themselves in a small, rocky clearing, the night sky stretching out impossibly vast and star-strewn above their heads. The ground was covered in a thin layer of snow, the trees encircling the clearing like silent sentinels. For a moment, they simply lay there, gasping and trembling as the icy air seared their lungs. But the respite was short-lived. A hissing, crackling noise from below told them the aliens were already ascending the ladder, their relentless pursuit far from over. "We have to keep moving," Mark croaked, staggering to his feet. "Find somewhere to hide, regroup." His mind spun with half-formed plans and desperate ideas, each more implausible than the last. But one thing was certain, they couldn't go back to the cabin. Their only chance was to strike out into the wilderness, to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the alien invaders. Lisa climbed to her feet, pulling the kids up with her. Her face was streaked with grime and tears, but her eyes burned with a fierce, protective light. "We'll figure something out," she said, her voice hard with resolve. "We're not giving up. Not now. Not ever." Mark nodded, drawing strength from his wife's indomitable spirit. Together, they turned their backs on the mine shaft and plunged into the waiting forest, the alien hunters already nipping at their heels. The Johnson family stumbled through the dense underbrush, their lungs burning with each ragged breath. Behind them, the alien noises grew louder, the hissing and clicking interspersed with eerie electronic warbles that seemed to vibrate in their very bones. Mark led the way, his hand locked around Tyler's wrist in an unbreakable grip. Lisa followed close behind, half carrying Emma who had gone limp with exhaustion and fear. The little girl's sobs were muffled against her mother's shoulder, her face hidden in the tangle of Lisa's hair. They had no destination in mind, no plan beyond a blind, desperate flight into the unknown. The forest stretched out around them like an endless labyrinth, the towering pines blotting out the starry sky. The snow lay thick and untouched beneath their feet, swallowing their tracks as soon as they were made. Suddenly, a searing blue beam lanced through the trees to their left, vaporizing a massive trunk in a shower of sparks and splinters. Mark veered sharply to the right, dragging Tyler with him as another beam sliced through the space where they'd been standing a heartbeat before. "They're gaining on us," Lisa gasped, her voice ragged with fear. "We can't outrun them, Mark. We need a plan." Mark's mind raced, desperately grasping for a solution. They couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, the aliens would catch up to them, and then. His gaze landed on a rocky outcropping up ahead, a jagged spur of stone that jutted out from the hillside like a broken tooth. An idea began to take shape in his mind, a last-ditch gamble that might buy them some precious time. "The rocks," he panted, pointing ahead. "We can use them for cover, try to lose them in the terrain." Lisa nodded grimly, shifting Emma's weight in her arms as they angled towards the outcropping. Tyler stumbled along beside them, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but he didn't falter or slow. They reached the base of the rocks just as another volley of beams sizzled through the trees around them, the heat of the blast singeing their hair and clothes. Mark boosted Tyler up onto the lowest ledge, then turned to help Lisa and Emma. But before he could reach them, a towering alien figure burst through the trees behind them, its bulbous head swiveling on its spindly neck as it fixed them with a piercing red stare. Lisa screamed, recoiling in terror as the creature raised its tubular weapon, the tip glowing with an unearthly blue light. Mark didn't hesitate. With a wordless cry of rage and desperation, he launched himself at the alien, tackling it around the knees and sending them both crashing to the ground. The weapon spun out of the creature's grasp, skittering away into the underbrush. "Climb!" Mark roared, grappling with the alien's flailing limbs. "Get to the top. I'll hold it off." Lisa hesitated for a split second, her eyes wide with horror and indecision. Then, with a choked sob, she scooped up Emma and began hauling her up the rocky face, Tyler scrambling ahead to find handholds and footholds. Mark and the alien rolled across the snowy ground, locked in a desperate struggle. The creature was incredibly strong, its spindly limbs belying a wiry, inhuman power. But Mark was fueled by a primal, animalistic fury, a father's rage at the threat to his family. He managed to wrap his hands around the alien's neck, squeezing with all his might. The creature thrashed and bucked, its metallic skin hot to the touch, but Mark held on like a man possessed. Black spots danced before his eyes, his lungs screamed for air, but he refused to let go. Just as he felt his strength beginning to fail, the alien went suddenly, horribly limp beneath him. Mark rolled off the creature's still form, gasping for breath, his whole body shaking with exhaustion and spent adrenaline. But there was no time to rest. More alien noises were drawing closer through the trees, the eerie warbles growing louder with each passing second. Mark staggered to his feet, snatching up the fallen alien weapon with numb fingers. The gun was surprisingly light in his hands, its surface smooth and warm to the touch. He could feel a faint vibration emanating from deep within the mechanism, a subtle thrum of power waiting to be unleashed. Mark turned and began hauling himself up the rocky face of the outcropping, following the path Lisa and the kids had taken. His muscles screamed in protest, his fingers scraped and bleeding on the jagged stone, but he pushed himself onwards with grim determination. He found his family huddled at the top of the ridge, their faces pale and stricken in the wan moonlight. Lisa had the kids pulled tight against her chest, her eyes closed as if in prayer. They looked up as Mark clambered over the edge, hope and fear warring in their expressions. "I got one of their weapons," Mark said, holding up the alien gun. "If they come for us again, I'll be ready." Lisa nodded, too spent for words. They all were. The adrenaline that had fueled their desperate flight was fading fast, leaving them drained and shaky in its wake. They sat there on the cold stone, huddled together for warmth and comfort as the night wore on. The alien noises faded away into the distance, the forest settling back into an uneasy silence. But none of them dared to hope that the danger had passed. They knew better than that now. As the first pale fingers of dawn began to creep over the eastern horizon, Mark finally stirred, his joints stiff and aching from the long, cold vigil. He stood up slowly, the alien weapon cradled in his arms. "We can't stay here," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "We need to find help, get word to the authorities about what's happening." Lisa nodded, climbing to her feet with a wince. "But where do we go? The cabin is miles away, and we don't even know if it's safe anymore." Mark hesitated, his gaze sweeping out over the landscape. The forest stretched out below them like a vast, unbroken sea, the morning mist swirling between the trees like ghostly fingers. He had no idea what lay beyond those misty valleys and snow-capped peaks, no notion of which direction might lead them to safety or salvation. But he did know one thing. They couldn't stay here, waiting for the aliens to find them again. They had to keep moving, had to press on until they found a way out of this nightmare. "We head east," he said at last, pointing towards a distant ridge that glowed pink and gold in the rising sun. "If we can make it over that range, we might be able to find a road, a ranger station, something." It was a long shot, and they all knew it. But it was the only shot they had. With a last, lingering look back at the now distant cabin that had once been their haven, the Johnson family set off into the unknown, their steps heavy with fear and determination in equal measure. In a story about family survival and fighting against the odds, hope is crucial. The Johnsons continue to rely on each other for strength despite terrible hardship. They struggle and suffer setbacks, but they always strive for the light on the horizon with a chance of rescue and returning to safety if they can endure. Their resolute will to battle on for each other's sake is what I aim to convey. The sun climbed higher in the sky as the Johnson family trekked eastward through the rugged wilderness. The terrain grew steadily steeper and rockier, the trees thinning out into scrubby patches of brush and hardy alpine grasses. Mark led the way, the alien weapon held at the ready in case of any sudden attacks. Lisa followed close behind, one arm wrapped around each of the kids' shoulders in a protective embrace. They were all exhausted and footsore, their clothes torn and filthy from their headlong flight through the woods, but they pushed onward with grim determination. Around midday, they crested a windswept ridge and paused to catch their breath. Far below, a narrow ribbon of road wound its way through the valleys, a thin thread of civilization amidst the vast wilderness. "Look!" Tyler cried, pointing towards a distant bend in the road. "I think I see something moving down there. Could it be a car?" Mark shaded his eyes against the glare of the sun, squinting into the distance. Sure enough, there was a small, dark shape trundling along the roadway, too far away to make out any details but undeniably man-made. "It's a vehicle of some kind," he confirmed, a spark of hope kindling in his chest. "If we can make it down there, flag them down." He trailed off, not wanting to voice the rest of his thought aloud. There was no guarantee that whoever was driving that car would be friendly, or even human. For all they knew, the aliens could have already infiltrated the local authorities, posing as park rangers or police officers to lure unsuspecting victims into their clutches. Lisa seemed to read his mind, her face hardening with resolve. "We have to take the chance," she said firmly. "It's our only hope of getting help, of warning people about what's happening out here." Mark nodded slowly, his grip tightening on the alien weapon. "You're right. But we have to be careful. We don't know who or what we're dealing with." They began the long, treacherous descent towards the road, picking their way carefully down the steep, rocky slopes. The sun beat down mercilessly from a cloudless sky, the thin mountain air searing their lungs with each labored breath. Halfway down, Emma stumbled and cried out in pain, clutching her ankle. Mark hurried to her side, kneeling down to examine the injury. "It's just a sprain," he said after a moment, relief washing over him. "But you won't be able to walk on it. I'll have to carry you." He hoisted the little girl onto his back, wincing as her weight settled onto his already aching muscles. But there was no other choice. They had to keep moving. By the time they finally reached the road, the sun was sinking towards the western horizon, the sky ablaze with streaks of orange and gold. The car they had seen earlier was long gone, the roadway deserted in both directions. Mark set Emma down gently on the shoulder of the road, his arms trembling with exhaustion. Lisa and Tyler collapsed beside her, their faces drawn and haggard. "What now?" Tyler asked, his voice small and scared in the gathering twilight. "What if no one comes?" Mark opened his mouth to reply, but before he could speak, the rumble of an engine cut through the stillness. A battered green pickup truck rounded the bend, its headlights cutting through the deepening gloom. Mark leapt to his feet, waving his arms frantically. "Hey! Hey, over here! We need help!" The truck slowed to a stop, the driver's side window rolling down to reveal a grizzled, bearded face. The man's eyes widened as he took in the family's disheveled appearance and the strange weapon in Mark's hand. "What in the Sam Hill is going on here?" he demanded, his voice thick with suspicion. "You folks in some kind of trouble?" "You could say that," Mark replied grimly. "Listen, I know this is going to sound crazy, but we were attacked by aliens. Real, honest-to-God extraterrestrials. They invaded our cabin, chased us through the woods. We barely escaped with our lives." The old man's bushy eyebrows shot up, his weathered face creasing in disbelief. "Aliens? Son, you been hitting the sauce out here in the woods? Because that's about the wildest tale I've ever dash." He broke off abruptly, his eyes going wide as dinner plates. Mark spun around to see a pair of spindly, metallic figures emerging from the tree line, their bulbous heads swiveling as they scanned the road with glowing red eyes. "Get in the truck!" Mark yelled, hefting the alien weapon. "Now!" Lisa scooped up Emma and practically flung her into the cab, Tyler scrambling in behind her. Mark stood his ground, his finger tightening on the trigger as the aliens advanced. The weapon bucked and whined in his grip, a searing blue beam lancing out to catch the lead alien square in the chest. The creature staggered back, smoke pouring from a gaping hole in its torso, but its companion kept coming, raising its own weapon to return fire. Mark dove aside as a volley of blasts sizzled through the space where he'd been standing, rolling to his feet and firing again. This time, his aim was true. The second alien crumpled to the ground, its head reduced to a smoldering ruin. Mark sprinted for the truck, leaping into the passenger seat as the old man gunned the engine. The tires spun and skidded on the loose gravel, then caught, propelling them down the road in a spray of dust and flying pebbles. In the rearview mirror, Mark could see more aliens boiling out of the trees, their weapons flashing as they gave chase. The old man cursed, swerving wildly as beams of blue fire streaked past the windows. "Hang on," he yelled, cranking the wheel hard to the left. The truck careened around a hairpin turn, tires screeching in protest. For a heart-stopping moment, they teetered on the edge of a sheer drop-off, then righted themselves with a bone-jarring thud. The aliens fell behind, their fire going wide as the truck hurtled down the twisting mountain road. But Mark knew it was only a matter of time before they caught up again. They had to get to safety, had to find a way to stop this invasion before it was too late. As if reading his thoughts, the old man glanced over at him, his eyes hard and glinting in the fading light. "You folks ain't the only ones who've seen them critters," he said grimly. "There's been sightings all over these parts, last few days. Folks going missing, strange lights in the sky. Thought it was all just crazy talk, till now." He reached under the seat and pulled out a battered CB radio, thrusting it into Mark's hands. "Here. Get on the horn, put out a warning. If what you're saying is true, folks need to know what's coming." Mark nodded, his jaw clenching with determination. He flicked on the radio, the static hissing and popping as he keyed the mic. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Mark Johnson broadcasting on an emergency frequency. If anyone is listening, please respond. Repeat, this is an emergency. We are under attack by hostile extraterrestrial forces. They have already infiltrated the area and are targeting civilians. We need military assistance immediately. If you can hear this, please send help. Mayday, Mayday." The truck sped on into the gathering darkness, the family clinging to each other as the radio crackled with desperate pleas for aid. They had escaped the alien hunters, for now. But their ordeal was far from over. The battle for Earth had only just begun.